You will be marrying Lord Harwick. The arrangements are made.
I won't.
I am interfering. Let me offer you a door.
I am willing.
Thank you for walking the further paths with me.
I am glad you stood beside me.
The morning Cicely Ashmore turned 18, her mother sold her. Not with chains, not with a contract written in blood, just a quiet conversation over cold tea in a drawing room that smelled of dried roses and old disappointment, while outside the window London carried on as though nothing in the world had changed. "You will marry Lord Harwick," her mother said. "The arrangements are made." Cecily had been standing by the window, watching a sparrow land on the iron gate below. She did not turn around. She had learned very early in life that turning around too quickly around her mother was dangerous. It showed too much, showed that you cared, showed that the words had landed somewhere soft inside you, and her mother had excellent aim for soft places. "Lord Harwick," Cecily repeated slowly. The way you repeat a word in a foreign language you are not sure you have heard correctly. "He is 63, her mother said, "and widowed twice. He has a fine estate in Lincolnshire and a reasonable income. He has agreed to take you without a dowry, which, given our current circumstances, is more generosity than you deserve." Cecily watched the sparrow fly away. She thought about 63. She was 18. She thought about twice widowed. She thought about what that meant, what those two dead women might have looked like, whether they had been young like her, whether they had also been sold by mothers who called it generosity. "I won't," she said, quietly, without drama. "The way you say something you know is useless but must say anyway, because otherwise you will stop being able to speak at all." Her mother set down her teacup. The sound of it, porcelain on porcelain, was very controlled. Her mother was always very controlled. That was the thing people said about Lady Dorothea Ashmore. What composure, what elegance, what a perfectly managed woman. They did not see what the composure managed. They did not see the thing it kept pressed down inside the girl who had grown up learning to be very small and very quiet. "You will," her mother said, "or I will write to your aunt in Edinburgh and tell her everything. About the books you were not supposed to read, about the letters to that tutor's son, about all of it." Cecily finally turned around. Her mother was looking at her with an expression Cecily could not name. It was not hatred exactly. It was something that had started as love, perhaps, a very long time ago, and then curdled. Nobody had ever said so out loud. The outline of it. But the inside had gone wrong somewhere, and nobody had ever said so out loud. "The tutor's son is gone," Cecily said. "You made sure of it." "I did," her mother said simply, "because you were becoming foolish. Girls who become foolish do not survive in this world. They end up with nothing and nobody steps in to help them. I have kept you from that. Everything I have done has kept you from that." This was the hardest thing about Lady Dorothea Ashmore. She believed it. She truly and completely believed that everything she had done to Cecily had been done out of love. The removal of the tutor's son, the burning of the novels, the years of silence at dinner where Cecily sat and said nothing because speaking led to corrections, and corrections led to that quiet, devastating look that said, "You are wrong, you are too much. You are not quite right." Lady Dorothea believed all of it had been necessary, and people who believe they are saving you are the hardest people in the world to escape because they hold the door shut with both hands and call it protection. Cecily looked at her mother for a long moment. When? She asked. The engagement will be announced at the Pemberton Ball, 3 weeks from Saturday. 3 weeks, Cecily nodded and turned back to the window. The Sparrow was gone. The iron gate was empty and cold, and the morning light was the pale, indifferent grey of a London sky that had seen too many things to be moved by one more. She thought, 3 weeks. So she thought, I have to find a way out. She spent those 3 weeks trying. She wrote to her aunt in Edinburgh, but her mother intercepted the letter. She asked Mrs. Pruitt, the housekeeper, the only person in the house who had ever shown her anything resembling kindness, whether there was any money set aside, any small amount. Mrs. Pruitt held her hands and looked at her with sorry eyes, and said there was nothing. Cecily even considered simply walking out of the house and not coming back. To go where, she did not know. With what, she did not know. She had no money, no connections of her own. She was 18 years old and had been raised for exactly one purpose, to be acceptable to a man. And the man her mother had chosen was Lord Harwick, and that was the whole of it. She did not yet know that the way out would not come from her own cleverness or from running. She did not yet know it would come from a man who barely spoke, who stood at the edges of rooms while other men filled the centers of them, who had a reputation so layered with rumor and silence that most of London had simply stopped trying to understand him. She did not yet know about the Duke of Ashvale, but she would. The Pemberton Ball was exactly the kind of event that made certain people feel magnificent and certain other people feel like furniture. The house blazed with candlelight. Women moved through it in silks that whispered against polished floors. Men stood in clusters talking about horses and money in the comfortable voices of people who had never seriously worried about either. So Cecily stood near the far wall in a gown her mother had chosen. Pale blue, modest neckline, the kind of dress designed to make a girl look like she was not quite there, like she was a suggestion of a person rather than a whole one. Her mother had dressed her this way for years, always a little faded, always a little less, as though brightness was something Cecily had not yet earned. Lord Harwick had not arrived. He was, she had been told, often late. One of the privileges of being 63 and wealthy, and not particularly concerned with the feelings of others. Cecily's hands were cold. She pressed them together and watched the room, and tried to breathe in a way that did not show. She was trying very hard not to cry when she became aware that someone was standing near her. Not the way people stand near each other in crowded rooms. Near her deliberately, still, like he had chosen the spot and was comfortable in it. She looked. He was tall, dark coat, dark eyes, dark hair slightly longer than fashion required. Not handsome in the easy, obvious way. Handsome the way certain buildings are handsome. The ones that look plain at first, and then you notice the detail in the stonework, and you realize the plainness was restraint, was something far more considered than prettiness. He was looking at the room, not at her. He did not speak. She waited. Nobody stood this close to a person at a ball without speaking. It was simply not done. He simply stood there like a very quiet wall. "You are not going to introduce yourself," Cecily said finally, because the silence had gone on long enough, and she was in too much misery to perform patience she did not have. He looked at her then. His eyes were dark and very steady, the eyes of someone who had learned to look at difficult things without looking away. "No," he said. One word, calm, as though the decision required no further explanation. "That is terribly rude," she said. "Yes," he agreed. She waited for more. There was no more. "Then why are you standing here?" she asked. He was quiet a moment. "Because Lord Harwick has just arrived," he said, low and careful, "and he is coming in this direction, and you looked as though you needed a moment before that happened." Cecily went very still. She looked across the room, and there he was, Lord Harwick, shorter than she had imagined, and rounder with the red-faced satisfaction of a man who had eaten very well for 63 years. His small, bright eyes were scanning the room, and she knew with a cold certainty that settled in her chest like stone that he was looking for her. "You know about the engagement," she said. "Everyone knows," the man beside her said. "London knows everything within 48 hours. It is one of its less charming qualities." "And you thought you would come stand beside me?" "I thought," he said carefully, "that you might prefer not to be alone when he found you." Cecily did not know what to do with that. Nobody in her memory had thought about what she might prefer. She had been arranged around other people's comfort for so long that the gesture landed inside her like something almost painful, the way warmth hurts when you have been cold for too long. "Who are you?" she asked. He looked at her. "Ashvale," he said. And then Lord Harwick reached them, and the evening became something else entirely. Lord Harwick's eyes moved over Cecily, the way a merchant's eyes move over goods he is considering purchasing. That look lasted only a second, but it was the kind of look that takes something from you, takes a small piece of the feeling that your body belongs to yourself. "Miss Ashmore," he said jovially, "what a delightful creature you are. Your mother described you well." "Good evening, Lord Harwick," Cecily said in the flattest voice possible while remaining technically polite. Lord Harwick turned and noticed the man beside her. Something shifted in his face. A recalibration. "Ashvale," he said with considerably less warmth. "Harwick," the Duke said. Nothing else. He simply looked at the older man with those steady dark eyes. And Lord Harwick, Sue, who had walked over with the easy confidence of a man collecting something already his, seemed to shrink by a quarter of his size. "I was not aware you and Miss Ashmore were acquainted," Lord Harwick said carefully. "We have just become acquainted," Ashvale said. "I had hoped to have a word with my intended, if you would excuse us." "Not quite yet," Ashvale said. Pleasantly, calmly, in the tone of a man accustomed to saying things that end conversations. Lord Harwick blinked. He smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "Of course," he said. "Another time?" And he walked away with the careful dignity of a man pretending he had not just been dismissed. Cecily let out a breath she had not known she was holding. "He will be angry later," she said. "Probably," Ashvale agreed. "You have made things harder for me." "I have made tonight easier," he said. "Tonight was what I was concerned with." She looked at him. He was watching the room again in that way he had, like he was seeing something only he could find. "Why?" she asked. "You don't know me." He was quiet a moment. "No," he said, "but I know Harwick, and I know what a girl looks like when she is standing at the edge of something she did not choose and cannot escape." He paused. "I have seen it before." There was weight in those last 4 words, personal weight, the kind that comes from experience and not just observation. Cecily wanted to ask. She did not ask. She had spent her life learning to read the moments when asking was the wrong thing. "Thank you," she said instead. He looked at her then, briefly, and something moved across his face. See, too fast to catch completely, but she caught the edge of it. Something that was almost, not quite, but almost, the beginning of warmth. "Don't thank me yet," he said quietly. The evening is not over. He was right. By the time it was, everything would be different. After supper came dancing, and Ashvale asked her. Not warmly, not with charm or flattery or the polished ease of other men who had asked her to dance at other events. He simply appeared beside her and said, "Dance with me, Miss Ashmore. Let Harwick see the evening has not gone entirely his way." She looked at his outstretched hand for a moment. She thought about her mother's face, about Lord Harwick's inventory eyes, about Lincolnshire. She took his hand. He was a good dancer, controlled, quiet, the kind of dancing that simply moves correctly and makes the person across from you feel steady, even in the middle of something terrible. She found herself breathing more easily than she had all evening. "He is watching," she said. "Let him," Ashvale said. "My mother is also watching. I'll ruin my own future if I am not careful. Ruin my own future if I am not careful." "And will you let her?" She looked up at him. It was a strange question. Nobody had ever asked her that particular question before, whether she would let her mother do the thing her mother was going to do, as though it were a choice, as though she had ever been given the tools to make that choice. "I don't know how not to," she said honestly. Something in his expression shifted. It was very small, that shift, but she was beginning to learn that with this man, the small things were the real ones. "No," he said quietly. "I imagine you don't." They danced the rest of that song in silence. The music stopped. He walked her back to the music stopped. He walked her back to the side of the room. Lord Harwick was no longer watching. He had found a group of men near the fireplace and was laughing loudly at something one of them had said. Her mother was watching, though. From across the room, with her winter sky silk and her careful expression, Lady Dorothea was watching her daughter with eyes that had already composed tomorrow's lecture in full. "I should go," Cecily said. "Yes," Ashvale agreed. He paused. "Miss Ashmore." She looked at him. "What your mother is arranging," he said slowly, as though each word was being weighed before being released, "is wrong. The man is not good." Anything about it?" she asked. Her voice, "Anything about it?" she asked. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. He looked at her for a long moment, that steady, dark, considering gaze. "Perhaps," he said, and then he was gone, moving through the crowd in that quiet way of his, and she stood alone at the side of the room, with that single word sitting in her chest, like a small, stubborn, impossible flame. Perhaps. Her mother's lecture began in the carriage on the way home. It covered in precise detail the recklessness of dancing publicly with a man who had not been approved, the embarrassment of giving Lord Harwick cause to doubt the family's reliability, and the ingratitude of a daughter who had been given every advantage and repaid it with willfulness. The lecture continued up the stairs and ended at the door of Cecily's bedroom, where Lady Dorothea delivered her final point with the quiet devastation she had perfected over years. "The engagement will proceed," she said. "Nothing you do at a ball changes that. Nothing you do changes that. Do you understand me, Cecily?" "Yes, Mother," Cecily said. She closed her bedroom door and stood in the dark for a long time. Perhaps. She thought about his face, the steadiness of it, the way he had stood beside her without asking anything in return, without explaining himself, without performing kindness the way so many people performed it, loudly, so you would notice and be grateful. He had simply done it, quietly, like it was the obvious thing. She did not know what to make of him. She did not know if his perhaps meant anything at all, or if she was building a house of hope on a single word spoken in a dim ballroom by a man who would probably forget her name by morning. But she lay down on her bed, and she thought about it anyway, because it was all she had, and sometimes all you have is a small, stubborn flame, and the decision not to let the dark put it out. 3 days later, a letter arrived. Not through the front door, where her mother received all correspondence and decided what was suitable. Through Mrs. Prewitt, who brought it to Cecily's room with a look on her face that mixed nervousness and private satisfaction in equal measure, and pressed it into her hands and said only, "I was told to see it reached you directly, miss," before retreating. Cecily looked at the seal. She did not know it. A bird, wings half spread, done in dark wax. Simple, precise. She opened it. The handwriting inside was the same as the man. Neat, controlled, not elaborate. No flourishes, words that went directly to what they meant. Miss Ashmore, I will not pretend I am not interfering where I have not been invited. I am interfering. I have made inquiries, and I understand your situation more fully now than I did at the Pemberton ball, including the detail of what Harwick is, and what those 2 previous marriages of his involved. I will not write the details here, but I believe you should not be permitted to walk into that without someone first attempting to provide an alternative. If you are willing to hear one, send word through the bearer of this letter. If you are not willing, I will trouble you no further. Either way, I want you to know that what is being done to you is not what you deserve. Whatever else happens, know that. Ashvale. Cecily read it 3 times. Then she sat on her bed and pressed the letter against her chest and breathed carefully for a long time, because something had broken open inside her that she had been keeping very tightly closed, and she needed a moment before she could be functional again. What is being done to you is not what you deserve. 18 years. 18 years she had been in that house, and nobody, not one single person who had any power in her world, had said that to her, had named it for what it was, had looked at the shape of her life and called it wrong instead of calling it appropriate and necessary and for your own good. She got up. She found paper. She wrote 2 words. I am willing. She folded it and went downstairs and found Mrs. Prewitt in the kitchen and pressed it into her hands. Then she went back upstairs and sat by her window and watched the gate and tried very hard to believe that the flame was real and that it was not going to go out. The alternative Ashvale proposed was not romantic. He was very clear about that from the beginning, which was itself something she found unexpectedly comforting. Men who led with romance were usually selling something. Men who led with plain honesty were rarer and considerably more interesting. They met at the home of his cousin, Lady Miriam Croft, a cheerful widow of 40 who greeted Cecily with the warmth of someone who had been fully briefed and had opinions about the situation. "Sit down, my dear," Lady Miriam said, "and let me get you some proper tea, because I suspect you have been served nothing but cold tea and cold conversations for quite some time." Cecily sat. She looked across the small, bright sitting room at the Duke of Ashfield, who was standing by the window in what she was beginning to understand was simply his preferred position in any room, at the edge of it, where he could see everything. "My proposal," he said without preamble, "is a practical one. I am in need of a wife. Not for romance, not for companionship, though I would not be opposed to that eventually. For entirely practical reasons related to my family's estate and certain conditions placed upon it by my late father's will. I have been required to marry before my 35th birthday, which is 11 months from now. I have been avoiding this requirement for some time. I have been avoiding it because the process of finding a wife in the way London expects one to find a wife is, frankly, intolerable to me. You don't enjoy balls, Cecily said. I do not enjoy performances, he said. Balls, drawing rooms, morning calls, the entire ritual. I find it exhausting and dishonest. Yet you came to the Pemberton Ball. I came to the Pemberton Ball because I had heard about Harwick's new engagement, and I wanted to see if what I had heard about you was accurate. She blinked. What had you heard about me? Something moved in his expression. That you were quietly remarkable, he said, in the same tone he used for everything, matter of fact, unhurried. And that you were being wasted. The room was very quiet for a moment. Lady Miriam from the corner said, More tea. To nobody in particular. What exactly are you proposing? Cecily asked. Marriage, he said. A real one, legally and formally. You would have my name, my protection, the security of the estate, and freedom from both Harwick and your mother's authority. I am aware this is unusual. I am aware, he paused. I am aware this is unusual. I am aware you do not know me. I am aware that trading one arrangement for another may seem like no improvement at all. But I want to be honest with you about what I am offering and what I am not, so that if you say yes, it is because you have genuinely chosen it, and not because you were deceived into it. Cecily looked at him for a long time. She thought about honesty, about how rare it was, about how her entire life had been built on things people told her were good for her that turned out to be good only for them. Why me? She asked, specifically. He was quiet a moment. When he spoke, his voice was a little lower. Because you stood at that wall at the Pemberton Ball, and you were terrified, and you still managed to be sharp and funny and entirely yourself. Because when Harwick looked at you the way he did, you did not shrink. You went still. There is a difference. People who go still have something inside them that has not been broken yet, despite everything. He paused. I did not want to watch that thing get broken. The flame. That small, stubborn, impossible flame. Cecily looked at her hands in her lap. My mother will not allow it, she said. Your mother, he said carefully, does not have to allow it. You are 18. Legally, you may consent to a marriage without parental permission. It would cause a scandal. She would be furious. Society would talk. And you don't mind that? Miss Ashmore, he said with something that was almost a dry smile at the corner of his mouth. I have been the subject of London gossip for 15 years. It has not killed me yet. Cecily looked at him. She looked at his steady dark eyes and his careful mouth, and the way he stood at the edge of the room like a man who had made peace a long time ago with the fact that he was always going to be slightly outside of things. She thought, he is strange. She thought, he is honest. She thought, he came and stood beside me when I was alone. I need 3 days, she said. Take them, he said. Take as many as you need. She took 2. On the evening of the second day, she sat at her small desk in her bedroom, and she wrote in her journal, which was the one private thing she had kept hidden inside the false bottom of her sewing box for 4 years. She wrote, I have been offered a door. I do not know what is on the other side of it. But I know what is on this side, and I think that knowing what you are walking away from is sometimes enough to justify the walking. She closed the journal. She went downstairs. Her mother was in the drawing room reading correspondence, a glass of sherry at her elbow, entirely composed, entirely herself. Cecily stood in the doorway and looked at her for a moment. She thought about 18 years. She thought about the tutor's son, whose name was William, and who had laughed at all her jokes and thought her clever and been removed from her life without ceremony or explanation, the way you remove a piece of furniture that is no longer useful. She thought about the novels burned in the fireplace. She thought about cold tea and cold mornings, and the particular cold of being looked at by your own mother, and seen as a problem to be solved. She thought, I love her, complicated and broken and twisted as it is. I love her. She is my mother, and I have loved her my whole life, and she has spent my whole life not quite knowing what to do with that. She thought, and I am leaving anyway. Mother, she said. Lady Dorothea looked up. I want you to know, Cecily said very calmly, that I am going to marry the Duke of Ashvale. The arrangements will be made this week. I am telling you as a courtesy, not as a request. The silence that followed was one of the longest Cecily had ever sat inside. Her mother's face did something complicated and private that Cecily had never seen it do before. It moved through several expressions too quickly to name all of them, and then it settled. It settled into something that was still controlled, still composed, but underneath the composure there was something new, something that looked, for just a moment, like loss. You will regret this, her mother said. Perhaps, Cecily said, and then she turned and walked away. London did exactly what Ashvale had promised it would do. It talked. The engagement was announced quietly, through proper channels, with the legal documentation signed before Lady Dorothea could organize any effective opposition. The Duke of Ashvale and Miss Cecily Ashmore. It went through drawing rooms and morning calls and gentlemen's clubs like a small, elegant explosion. People were fascinated. People were confused. People who had never spoken to Cecily in their lives suddenly had strong opinions about her character and her motivations. The most common theory, whispered over embroidery frames and across supper tables, was that Cecily had been cunningly scheming all along, that the pale blue dress and the wall standing had been calculated. With impressive precision for someone so young. People who said this nodded at each other with the satisfaction of people who have uncovered something clever. None of them considered that a girl standing at a wall in a dress chosen by her mother might simply have been a girl standing at a wall in a dress chosen by her mother. The second most common theory was that Ashvale had lost his mind. This theory was popular among the men. He could have had anyone, they said, shaking their heads over brandy. Anyone at all. Well-connected girls, well-dowried girls, girls from families with history and land and standing. Instead, he had chosen a nobody with no money and a mother who was now privately furious and making her fury known in the subtle, devastating way that Lady Dorothea Ashmore made everything known. Not loudly, just precisely. A comment here, a raised eyebrow there. The merest suggestion floated in the right drawing rooms that of course one wished the couple every happiness, one simply hoped poor Ashvale understood what he had taken on. Cecily heard all of this through Lady Miriam, who reported it with the cheerful thoroughness of a woman who found London gossip endlessly entertaining and felt it was important to be well informed. Ignore it, Lady Miriam said, pouring tea with the brisk efficiency she applied to everything. London talked about my first marriage, and my second marriage, and my decision not to have a third marriage, and it has not yet managed to say anything that materially affected my happiness. It is noise. The trick is to remember that it is noise made by people with nothing more important to concern themselves with. My mother is not noise, Cecily said. Lady Miriam paused. She set down the teapot and looked at Cecily with the direct, undecorated gaze of a woman who had decided long ago that honesty was kinder than comfort. No, she agreed. Your mother is a specific and more complicated problem. But even she cannot undo what is already legally done. The license is signed. The papers are filed. Whatever she says in drawing rooms, whatever she implies, whatever carefully placed words she drops into conversations, she cannot reach into the future and pull you back. That door is closed. Cecily nodded. She knew this. She believed it even. But knowing and believing a thing in your head and feeling it settle into your body as real and permanent are two entirely different experiences, and she had not yet arrived at the second one. Lady Dorothea's fury came, as predicted, in the form of a letter. It was written in her mother's best handwriting, which was itself a statement. Lady Dorothea wrote her most important communications in her best handwriting. It was a way of saying, I have taken care over this. This matters. This is considered. The letter said, you have made your choice. I hope you understand what you have sacrificed. The goodwill of this family, the respect of people who have known you your entire life, the opportunity to be settled properly, to be provided for in a way that was sensible and realistic, given your circumstances. You have thrown all of that away for a man whose reputation is built on silence and rumor and who, whatever his title, is not the safe harbor you imagine him to be. Men like Asheville do not marry girls like you out of kindness. There is always a reason. I hope you discover the reason before it is too late. Do not come to me when it goes wrong. Cecily read it once. She put it down. She picked it up and read it again, because the first reading had been too fast, too defended, too much about not letting the words land. The second reading she allowed them to land. She sat with them. The accusation that there was a hidden reason, the prediction that it would go wrong, the withdrawal of her mother's door. Do not come to me when it goes wrong. I hope you are well. I hope you are safe. I hope, whatever I think of the choice, that you are happy. She thought, my mother has never once said she hoped I was happy. She has said she hoped I would be sensible and settled and respectable and provided for. Never happy. As though happiness was not something a daughter was owed or could reasonably expect. As though it was an indulgence, a foolishness, something girls who become foolish concern themselves with. She folded the letter and put it in her sewing box and did not respond. Lord Harwick was also furious, and his fury was louder and less elegant than Lady Dorothea's. He wrote a strongly worded letter to his solicitor and made several pointed and unkind comments at his club about the reliability of women and the general untrustworthiness of the Ashmore family. For 2 weeks he was a source of considerable entertainment to the men who frequented the same circles, most of whom privately found him tedious and were enjoying the uncharacteristic drama. He threatened legal consequences. His solicitor gently explained that there were no legal consequences available to him, since the engagement to Cecily had never been formally announced, had existed only as a private arrangement between himself and Lady Dorothea had no legal authority to bind her adult daughter to any arrangement whatsoever. Harwick blustered at this for several more days, and then, because he was fundamentally a man who moved toward available comfort rather than unavailable fights, directed his attention elsewhere. He found a girl of 20 from a family in Shropshire with less pride and fewer complications. The engagement was announced 6 weeks later and written up in the papers with the restrained enthusiasm society reserved for expected events. Cecily heard about this through Lady Miriam over tea and felt only a vast, quiet relief on behalf of the girl from Shropshire, whoever she was. She hoped someone was standing beside her. She hoped someone was paying careful attention. The weeks between the engagement announcement and the wedding were strange and thin, like the pause between one season ending and the next one beginning. When the weather cannot make up its mind and everything feels temporarily suspended. Cecily was still living in her mother's house, which was awkward in the particular way that only a house can be awkward when everyone in it knows something enormous has changed and nobody is addressing it directly. Lady Dorothea had retreated entirely into composure. She was present at meals, correct at all times, and spoke to Cecily only about neutral things. The weather, the household accounts, whether Mrs. Prewitt had remembered to air the guest bedroom. She looked at Cecily with an expression that was precisely calibrated to reveal nothing, and Cecily looked back, and they both performed normalcy over the dining table with the dedicated thoroughness of two people who had been performing things for each other for 18 years and had become very good at it. Mrs. Prewitt, for her part, had squeezed Cecily's hands in the kitchen one morning when they were alone and said in a low voice thick with feeling, "You did right, miss. You did absolutely right," and then gone back to her work without another word, which Cecily felt was one of the kindest things anyone had done for her. Lady Miriam called every other day, as arranged, and her visits were the bright spots that the rest of the week arranged itself around. She brought news, cheerfully delivered. She brought her own particular brand of warmth, which was not soft and quiet like something fragile, but solid and practical, like good furniture. She also brought, on several occasions, useful information about Ashvale Park that she thought Cecily ought to know in advance, things like which members of the staff had been there the longest, and what they valued, the state of the household accounts, which Ashvale managed efficiently, but without any particular enjoyment, the situation with the orangery, which had been closed up for years, and which Lady Miriam felt was a tragedy. "He is not a man who notices spaces," Lady Miriam said, on one such visit. "He notices people, and he notices problems, and he notices things that are broken. But spaces, rooms, the way a house feels, the way it breathes, he does not attend to those. His mother did when she was alive. The park was magnificent then. The wedding was small and quiet, which suited them both perfectly. A church in Mayfair on a morning caught between grey and blue, the sky doing something indecisive and soft above the London rooftops, clouds thin enough that the light came through them diffused and gentle, the kind of morning that does not demand anything of you. Lady Miriam was there in deep green silk, and an expression of barely contained delight that she was making absolutely no effort to hide. Two of Ashvale's oldest friends, men named Hartwell and Soane, stood as witnesses and greeted Cecily with the careful warmth of people who cared about him deeply and were trying not to make her feel examined and only partially succeeding at it. The vicar was a small, round man with kind eyes, who read the words with the gentle efficiency of someone who understood the ceremony mattered and did not need to be made larger than it already was. Cecily wore ivory, a dress she had chosen herself, which was the first dress she had chosen for herself in recent memory. When she had stood in the dressmaker's shop 3 weeks earlier and realized that nobody was going to tell her what was appropriate, that Lady Miriam was simply standing to one side with her arms folded and her mouth completely shut, something had moved inside her. Something small and significant. The first exercise of a muscle she had not known she possessed. She had looked at the fabrics and the styles, and she had chosen ivory because she liked it. Simple sleeves that sat properly on her shoulders. How a neckline that was neither deliberately modest nor deliberately daring, but simply right. A skirt that moved well when she walked. She liked it for no other reason than that it was what she would have chosen if she had always been the one doing the choosing. She had stood in front of the mirror at the final fitting and thought, "This is what I look like when I am allowed to be the one looking." She was nervous in the carriage, hands cold, pressed together in her lap the way they always were when she was frightened. She looked out at the London streets going past, the ordinary morning business of them, carts and carriages and people walking in directions that had nothing to do with her, and she tried to breathe in a way that reached all the way down. Lady Miriam sat across from her and said nothing for most of the journey, and took both of Cecily's cold hands in, and took both of Cecily's cold hands in her warm ones, and looked at her directly. "He is not easy to know," she said. Not gently. Clearly. The way she said everything that mattered. He is not warm in the way that makes people comfortable quickly. But he is good, deeply and genuinely good in the way that is much rarer and far more valuable than easy or comfortable. Do you understand me? Yes, Cecily said. Good. Lady Miriam released her hands and sat back. Now breathe properly. You have gone quite pale. Cecily breathed properly. The carriage stopped. The door opened. She stepped out onto the pavement and stood for just a moment in the cold morning air and felt it on her face and thought, "This is the last moment of the old thing. Everything after this door is new." She went in. She saw him before he saw her, standing at the front of the church with his back to her, very still, in a dark coat that fit him well, and even from behind she could see that particular quality he had, the quality of someone completely present in a space without demanding anything from it, not performing being there, simply being there, entirely, without reservation or performance of any kind. When he turned and saw her coming down the aisle, the nervousness did something unexpected. It did not disappear. It rearranged itself into something more manageable. For a long time, without quite knowing it, for a long time without quite knowing it was where you were going. He looked at her the way he always looked at things that mattered to him, carefully, completely, without the layer of performance that most people kept between themselves and the things they actually felt. She was learning that this was simply how he was built. No performance, no careful distance maintained for the sake of appearances, just the thing itself, steady and real and directed entirely at her. She reached him. They stood side by side and the vicar began. She listened to every word. She had expected to be somewhere else in her mind during the ceremony, half present, the other half running through worries. But she was entirely there. Each word landed somewhere real inside her. To have and to hold. She thought about holding, about what it meant to be held in the true sense, to be kept safe, to be thought of, to be someone's genuine consideration. She had not been anyone's real consideration for a very long time, for better, for worse. She thought about the worse she already knew. She thought she was not frightened of worse the way she had once been, because she had already survived worse and come out of it standing. And that was more than nothing. To love and to cherish. Cherish was an old word, a serious word. To cherish something was to hold it with particular daily attention, to treat it as valuable not just in the abstract, but in the specific repeated moments of every ordinary day. She had spent 18 years being managed. The distance between managed and cherished was the distance between being someone's problem and being someone's person. When the vicar asked if she consented, she said yes in a voice that was quiet but entirely clear. When it was done, Ashvale took her hand, and his hand was warm, which surprised her more than she expected. She had half imagined it would be cool and controlled like so much of him. It was warm and large and steady, and she held on to that warmth all the way back up the aisle, while Lady Miriam, from the left pew, produced a sound that might have been a suppressed sob, and which she would later deny with great conviction. They walked out into the morning. The light had decided on blue while they were inside. Or she stood on the church steps and breathed cold air, and felt his warm hand in hers, and thought, I am different than I was an hour ago. The law says so. I say so. The difference is real. He looked at her. All right? Better than all right, she said, simply, meaning every word of it. Something in his face moved. That small opening, brief and real. Good, he said. Ashvale Park appeared through the carriage window in the fading afternoon light, like something from the better kind of dream. The kind where things are exactly as good as you hoped, but also more specific, more real, more genuinely themselves than anything imagined can quite manage to be. Stone the color of old honey. Gardens gone slightly wild at the edges in the way of things maintained but not recently loved. A long drive lined with bare trees that would clearly be extraordinary in any other season. Windows catching the last pale light and holding it warmly. She pressed her face toward the carriage window like a child and did not care at all. It needs work, Ashvale said, the tone of someone apologizing for something they love. I can see that, she said. I like it very much. He looked at her with an expression she was going to spend a long time learning to read in full. The house received them with the quiet dignity of old houses that have seen many arrivals and make no fuss about one more. The staff were assembled in the entrance hall, and Ashvale introduced each of them to Cecily with genuine care, saying something specific and true about each person that made each introduction feel like an acknowledgement of a real human being rather than an item being catalogued. She noted this carefully and stored it with the other things she was learning about him. The housekeeper, Mrs. Beam, was a tall woman of about 60, with a face settled into practical competence, not unkind but not soft either. She assessed Cecily in approximately 3 seconds and said, with measured warmth, Welcome to Ashvale Park, Your Grace. I hope you will find everything in order. Your Grace. She was going to need time to wear that naturally. She smiled and said she was sure she would find everything perfectly in order, and Mrs. Beam's expression shifted 2 careful degrees toward approval, which felt like a genuine and hard-won achievement. Dinner was in the smaller dining room. His choice, she understood immediately. Less overwhelming for a first night. She did not mention that she had noticed. She simply sat down and felt quietly grateful for it. After dinner, she asked to see the library, and it was everything he had implied, and considerably more. Books on shelves and books on the floor in careful stacks, and a desk entirely buried under correspondence, and 3 ink pots, 2 of them empty. A fire already built because someone on the staff knew him well enough to expect him here at this hour of the evening. She stood in the middle of the room and turned slowly around. The floor books are current reading, she said. The windowsill ones are recently finished but not reshelved. The shelves are organized by something but not subject and not alphabet. He was watching her with completely open attention, the full, unguarded look she had learned to treasure. Acquisition, he said. The order I came to them. So I remember not just what I read, but where I was in my life when I read it. She looked at the walls of books, organized by the timeline of his inner life, and felt something open wide in her chest, warm and a little aching all at once, the feeling of recognizing someone you were not expecting to find. That is the most interesting system I have ever heard of, she said. Most people find it completely absurd. Most people, she said, are wrong about a great many things. He looked at her for a long, still moment. Sit down. I will show you where I was when I first came here alone. She sat. He moved through the library of his life, and she asked questions, and he answered them completely and without deflection. She told him things too. About the novels her mother burned, about the ones she had hidden inside her sewing box, about the book she had read by candlelight under her covers for 3 consecutive winters until the cover fell entirely off, and she had held the pages together with a piece of ribbon. He listened to all of it with that full, undeflected attention that she was beginning to understand was simply the way he loved things, by paying them his complete and serious regard. At some point, tea arrived, left quietly on the corner of the desk by Mrs. Beam without announcement. Cecily thought, she has done this before, brought him tea in the library late at night, and tonight she did it for me too without being asked. That meant something about how things would be in this house. She wrapped both hands around the cup and felt genuinely deeply warm for the first time in what felt like considerably longer than it had actually been. When the fire had burned lower, he set down the book he had been showing her and said quietly, "I want to say something." She looked at him across the warm disorder of the room. "I know this is strange," he said. "I know you have walked from one uncertain situation into another, and that the uncertainty here is a different kind but still real. I know I am not easy to know. I am told I am too quiet, too serious, that I make people feel they are being studied. I do not intend that. See, I am simply always genuinely interested in people, and I have never found another way to show interest except paying very careful attention to everything." "You have been paying careful attention to me," she said. "From the very first moment," he said. "At the Pemberton ball, before I even crossed the room or spoke a word to you. I watched you standing at that wall, and I thought, there is someone who has been told for a very long time that they are not quite right, not quite enough, not quite what was needed." He paused, and I thought, whoever told her that was entirely wrong. The fire crackled softly. Outside the windows, the country dark was thick and still and enormous, the deep, complete dark that London, with all its noise, never managed. Cecily felt something shift inside her. Say, something that had been braced and defended for so long, it had come to feel like her natural shape. It moved, just slightly, like a door on a very stiff hinge moved for the first time in years, not open yet, but no longer entirely shut. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "When you said at the ball that you had seen it before, a girl at the edge of something she did not choose, who were you thinking of?" He was quiet a moment. "My sister," he said. "Eleanor. She died 6 years ago. She was 22. He stopped, started again. "She was married at 17 to a man our father chose, a man not unlike Harwick in the ways that mattered. She did not survive the marriage." He looked at the fire. "I had every tool available to me, and I did not use them in time. Because you asked an honest question, and because you asked an honest question, and you deserve an honest answer. And because I want you to understand why I came and stood beside you that night. It was not charity. It was not rescue for the romance of it. I saw a door closing on someone who still had time. He paused. I was not going to stand there and watch that happen again. Cecily sat with that. With Eleanor, who had been 22 and was gone. With this man who had carried that grief for 6 years and turned it not into bitterness but into quiet, unhurried action. Standing beside people in dark ballrooms, offering doors, stepping back and letting the person decide. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. He nodded. They sat together in the warm disorder of the library with the fire going low and the dark pressing softly at the windows and the whole long day settling around them like something finally put down after being carried a great distance. "I think," she said slowly, feeling toward it carefully, "that I am going to like being here. I think this is somewhere I can actually be without performing the being, without calculating the right size to make myself." He looked at her with that open, steady gaze, nothing held back from it. "I think so too," he said. She believed him, not from naivety, because she had learned by now that he said exactly what he meant and nothing he did not. And when he said, "I think so too," he meant it the way he meant everything, completely and without decoration of any kind. She settled deeper into the chair. The fire settled too. Outside, somewhere behind the kitchen garden, the orangery waited in the dark, closed and patient. She thought, "Tomorrow I will find it. Tomorrow everything properly begins." She looked at him by the fire, the book back in his lap, the room warm and real around them both. She was already home. Spring came to Ashvale Park the way it always came to the countryside, quietly, and then all at once, the bare trees filling out overnight, it seemed, the grounds going from brown and grey to something so green it almost hurt to look at directly. Cecily stood at the bedroom window on the first genuinely warm morning and felt the light on her face and thought that she had never in her life paid proper attention to spring before. In London, spring was something that happened to other people. Here it felt personal, like the land was doing it specifically, deliberately, for anyone willing to stand still long enough to receive it. She had been at Ashvale Park for 6 months now. 6 months of learning the rhythms of a place, the way a house breathes differently in different seasons, the way the staff moved through their days, the way the light changed room by room as the hours passed. 6 months of becoming, slowly and without drama, someone she actually recognized when she looked in the mirror. She dressed quickly and went downstairs before breakfast, which had become her habit, the early morning hour before the house fully woke being the time she liked best, when everything was quiet and belonged to nobody yet, and she could move through it freely. She went outside. The kitchen garden was already busy. 2 of the younger gardeners were turning soil in the far beds, and Hoskins was standing at the entrance to the orangery with his arms folded and an expression of deep personal satisfaction on his weathered face, which was the closest Hoskins ever came to open joy. "Come and look," he said when he saw her without greeting, because Hoskins did not waste time on greetings when there were more important things happening. She came and looked. The Meyer lemons were fruiting, small and bright and impossibly yellow against the dark green leaves, the first fruit the orangery had produced in 7 years, hanging from the branches with the cheerful confidence of things that had decided to live and were pleased about the decision. The citrus smell hit her the moment she stepped inside, warm and sharp and clean, the smell of something alive and thriving in a space that had been closed and silent for so long. She stood among the trees and breathed it in. 7 years, Hoskins said from behind her. His voice had something in it she had not heard before, something quieter than his usual tone. 7 years, she agreed. They stood together in the warm, fruiting orangery for a moment without speaking, which was its own kind of conversation between two people who had spent enough mornings working side by side to be comfortable inside each other's silences. She would have been pleased, Hoskins said, very quietly, not looking at Cecily, looking at the lemon trees. He meant the late Duchess, Ashvale's mother, the woman who had planted these trees and tended them and filled this space with living things until she could not any more. Hoskins had served her for 20 years. Cecily had understood for some time that the thorniness people described in him was simply grief wearing a practical coat, the way grief does when it belongs to someone who does not believe in putting it on display. "Tell me about her," Cecily said, gently. He was quiet for a moment. Then he began to talk, slowly at first and then with more ease, about a woman who had known the name of every plant on the estate and the birthday of every member of staff, and who had walked these grounds every morning, regardless of weather, with the unhurried confidence of someone who understood that belonging to a place required showing up for it daily, who had laughed easily and argued passionately about roses, and sat in this very orangery on winter afternoons, reading while the cold pressed at the glass outside, and the citrus trees kept everything warm within. Cecily listened to all of it. When he finished, she said, "She sounds like someone worth knowing." "She was," Hoskins said. He cleared his throat. He picked up his tool from where he had rested it against the wall. "The lemons will be ready to pick in a fortnight. I thought you might want to be the one to do it." He walked out before she could respond. But she had learned enough about Hoskins by now to understand that the offer was everything, that it was his way of saying, "You belong here now. This is yours now. I am willing for it to be yours." She stood among the lemon trees for a long time after he left. She found Hartwell and Soane at Ashvale Park that afternoon, arrived unexpectedly from London with horses and noise and the particular cheerful energy of men who had ridden hard and were pleased about it. They were in the entrance hall when she came in from the gardens, mud on her boots and her hair escaping its pins, and for a split second she felt the old instinct, the reflex of 18 years, to apologize for how she looked, so to make herself smaller and more presentable and less obviously herself. She did not do it. "Miss Ashmore," Hartwell said warmly, and then caught himself. "Your Grace. Forgive me, I keep forgetting." "So do I," she said honestly. "Come in. Have you eaten?" They had not eaten. She organized food with Mrs. Beam's assistance and sat with them in the large dining room that no longer felt quite as enormous as it had on the first night, partly because she had rearranged it slightly, moved 2 pieces of furniture, brought in some things from other rooms, made it feel less like a public building and more like somewhere people actually lived. Hartwell noticed. He looked around with the expression of someone who has been coming to a place for years and has just realized it is different without being able to identify exactly what has changed. "The room looks well," he said. "It needed some adjusting," she said. Soane smiled at her from across the table. He had a good smile, Soane, warm and direct, the smile of someone who paid attention and liked what they saw. "You have been busy," he said. "The orangery is fruiting," she said. "The first fruit in 7 years." Both men were quiet for a moment. They looked at each other with an expression she could not quite read, something private between them. the communication of people who had known someone a long time and understood the significance of things that had been closed for 7 years being open again. He told us about the orangery, Hartwell said carefully, about his mother. He does not speak of her often. I know, Cecily said. He has spoken of her to you? She thought about the conversation in the carriage on the wedding day, the careful words about a woman who grew citrus in an English winter because she gave things her complete attention. A little, she said. I think he will speak of her more eventually. He is not a man who rushes things. Sohn laughed. That, he said, is the most precise description of him I have ever heard from anyone who has known him less than a decade. She smiled and passed the bread, and the conversation moved into easier territory, London gossip and the state of the roads, and an account of a horse race that Hartwell described with the enthusiasm of someone who had won money on the outcome. But underneath the easy conversation, she was aware of something else, something she could feel from both of them. A warmth toward her that was genuine and not performed, the warmth of men who cared about their friend and were quietly, without making a ceremony of it, glad about what they saw. Ashvale returned from the eastern farms at 4 in the afternoon to find his 2 oldest friends eating his food and laughing with his wife in the large dining room, and he stood in the doorway for a moment before any of them noticed him. Cecily saw his face in that unguarded second before he knew he was being watched. He looked at the 3 of them at the table, at her specifically, at the ease of her, the way she was leaning forward in her chair saying something that was making Sohn laugh properly, and his expression was the open one, the unguarded one, the one she had been collecting for 6 months. Then he noticed her noticing him, and it closed slightly. Not completely, not the way it used to close before she knew him, but enough. You might have sent word, he said to Hartwell. We did, Hartwell said. You were apparently in a field. I was inspecting the drainage on the eastern boundary. Which is exactly as fascinating as it sounds, Sohn said. Cecily stood and said, Sit down. Mrs. Beam is sending more food. He looked at her, something in his expression at the ordinary domestic authority of that sentence, at being told to sit down in his own dining room by someone who had made herself entirely at home in it, was so close to warmth it was barely distinguishable from it. He sat down. That evening, after Hartwell and Sohn had been settled into guest rooms and the house had gone quiet, Cecily and Ashvale walked the grounds together. This was not an established habit. They had not done this before. She had simply, after dinner, said she wanted to walk while the evening was still warm enough, and he had stood up without comment and come with her, and now they were moving along the path that ran between the kitchen garden and the orangery in the blue early dark of a spring evening, with the first stars just becoming visible overhead. She told him about Hoskins and the lemon trees and what he had said about the late Duchess. Ashvale was quiet for a moment. They walked a few more steps. He never speaks of her, he said, to anyone. He spoke of her to me, she said simply. He looked at her sideways as they walked, that considering look. What did he say? She told him. All of it. The daily walks regardless of weather, the knowing of every plant and every birthday, the afternoons reading in the orangery while the cold pressed at the glass. She told it carefully and completely because she understood that she was giving him something, returning something, a piece of his mother seen through someone else's eyes, and that it deserved to be given properly. When she finished, he did not speak for a little while. They had reached the end of the path and turned without discussing it, and were walking back the way they had come, see the lights of the house warm and steady ahead of them. "She would have liked you," he said finally. "Hoskins said the same thing about the lemons. Hoskins says more in one sentence than most people manage in an hour." He paused. "I mean it, though. She would have liked you specifically. She had no patience for performance. She found most of what passed for society conversation actively painful. She would have sat you down in the orangery and talked to you for 3 hours and then told me afterward that you were the most sensible person she had met in years." Cecily walked beside him and felt that full warm opening in her chest, the one she was getting more accustomed to but had not yet gotten entirely used to. "I wish I had known her," she said. "So do I," he said. "Every day." They walked in comfortable silence the rest of the way back to the house. A letter arrived from Lady Dorothea the following week. Cecily had written to her mother at the 4-month mark, a short, careful letter describing the orangery and Hoskins and the new life without asking for anything or offering more than she genuinely had to offer. She had not expected a quick reply. Her mother was not a quick reply sort of person. Her mother was a person who composed responses the way she composed everything, carefully, with full consideration of every word and what it might reveal. The letter was short. Her mother said the London house was very quiet. She said Lord Harwick had married the girl from Shropshire. She said the garden was suffering. She said nothing directly about Cecily's marriage or her choice, or any of the things that sat unresolved between them like furniture. Neither of them knew how to move. But at the end of the letter, in her mother's best and most careful handwriting, were 4 words. "I hope you are happy." Cecily read them standing at the window of the morning room with the spring light coming in warm and yellow around her and the sound of Hoskins doing something authoritative in the kitchen garden below. She read them twice. She stood with them for a long time, 18 years, and her mother had never once arranged those 4 words in that order and directed them at her. Had hoped she would be sensible, settled, respectable, provided for. Had never hoped, or never said she hoped, that her daughter might simply be happy. 4 words was probably everything Lady Dorothea Ashmore had. Cecily understood that now in a way she could not have understood at 18, standing at that drawing-room window watching the sparrow on the iron gate. Her mother was not a woman built for more than 4 words on this particular subject. The architecture of her simply did not allow for more. And fighting the architecture of a person, Cecily had learned, was like fighting the drainage on the eastern boundary. You could redirect things. You could not change the fundamental shape of the land. She folded the letter. She held it for a moment. Then she went to find paper and wrote back. The reply she sent was also short. She told her mother the Meyer lemons were fruiting. She told her that spring had come to Wiltshire in a way that made everything look like something out of a painting. She told her that she was well and that the house was good, and that yes, to answer the 4 words at the end of her mother's letter, she was happy. Actually and genuinely happy, the kind that did not need to be performed or maintained by effort, the kind that simply was, the way the lemon trees simply were, alive and present and producing something real. She sealed it and sent it and went back outside into the spring morning. On the afternoon the lemons were ready, Hoskins presented himself at the house and told Mrs. Beam, who told Cecily, who put down what she was doing immediately and went to the orangery with the small basket Hoskins had left by the door for exactly this purpose. She picked them herself, every one of them. Moving through the trees carefully, the warm citrus smell all around her, the spring light coming through the clean glass ceiling in long, bright columns. And she thought about all the things a space could hold, the silence of 7 years and the life before it, and the new life now growing in it, all of it present at once, layered the way everything real is layered, nothing entirely gone. Nothing entirely separate from what came before. She was nearly finished when she heard the door. She turned. Ashvale was standing at the entrance to the orangery. He had come from the farms again, she could tell, coat dusty, boots not clean, the slightly windswept look of a man who had been outside for several hours. He was looking at the trees, at the fruit, at the whole living space that had been dark and closed for 7 years and was now warm and bright and full of yellow lemons, and the particular quality of light that only comes through glass into a space where things are growing. He did not speak. He simply stood and looked. She watched his face. She had become, over 6 months, extremely good at reading his face, at finding the real thing underneath the controlled surface. What she saw now was not something she had words for exactly. It was too large for words. It was the expression of someone confronted with something they had believed was gone forever, and have found is not gone, has never been entirely gone, has simply been waiting in the dark for someone willing to tend it back into the light. His jaw moved slightly. He looked at the lemon trees, and she knew he was seeing his mother in them, the woman who had planted them and loved them and left them behind, and she knew he was feeling the particular grief of finding someone in a place they no longer were, present and absent at the same time. She waited. He looked at her then. Across the warm, bright space of the orangery, across the lemon trees and the new soil and the cleaned glass ceiling, letting the spring light in. "You did this," he said quietly. "Hoskins did most of it," she said. "No," he said. He held her gaze. "You did this." She stood among the lemon trees with her basket and looked at him standing in the doorway of the orangery his mother had loved. And the thing between them in that moment was too full and too real for either of them to say anything more about it, so neither of them did. He crossed the space and took the basket from her hands and looked into it at the lemons, small and bright and impossibly alive. "Come for a walk with me," he said. She came. They walked the full grounds together in the late afternoon light, further than they had walked before, out past the kitchen garden and the orangery and the formal lawns, and into the wilder edges of the estate where the grounds gave way to meadow, and the meadow gave way to a small wood that was full of bluebells this time of year. A blue so deep and so complete, it looked like a piece of sky had come down and settled among the trees. They stood at the edge of the bluebell wood and looked at it. "I had forgotten about the bluebells," he said. "How does a person forget bluebells?" she asked. "By not walking far enough," he said. He looked at the wood and then at her. "I have not walked this far in years. I walk the same paths, the same distance, the same circuit." "Why?" He was quiet a moment. "Because the further paths were hers," he said simply. "She walked them. I did not want to walk them alone." Cecily stood beside him at the edge of the bluebell wood in the late spring afternoon and understood completely. The orangery, the further paths, the lemon trees, all of it sealed up and avoided and left in the dark, not from neglect but from love. from the particular way grief makes people preserve the shape of things as they were, because changing them feels like losing them all over again. She took his hand. He looked down at their joined hands and then at her face. His expression was the open one, fully open. Nothing held back from it. "Thank you," he said, very quietly. "For what specifically?" she asked. He thought about it with the seriousness he brought to everything worth thinking about seriously. "For coming here," he said, "for the orangery, for walking the further paths with me, for making it possible to walk them." He paused. "For being entirely and completely yourself in a house that has been missing someone entirely and completely themselves for a long time." The bluebells moved slightly in the late afternoon breeze. The light was going golden, the particular gold of a spring evening that knows it is beautiful and is not embarrassed about it. Cecily held his hand and looked at the bluebell wood and thought about sparrows on iron gates and pale blue dresses and a single word, perhaps, small and stubborn and full of everything that came after it. "I am glad you came and stood beside me," she said. "So am I," he said. They stood there together until the light changed and the gold deepened into the softer colors of early evening, and then they walked back through the meadow and the kitchen garden and into the warm house together, and behind them the bluebell wood held the last of the light for a little while longer before letting it go.